What's up, guys? I want to quickly explain how I would look at mechanics if I were you looking at your own mechanics, and I'm going to do that by looking at my own mechanics from this season. One, we have a touch and feel, and one, we have an in-game. And the first point I want to make is when you're looking at mechanics, I would tend to only look at your high intent mechanics because of the fact that if we watch this touch and feel, there's a lot of things that I'm not doing very well. Obviously, that's because of the intensity level, but that doesn't mean that there's not still a place for it. It just means that that's not going to be my game mechanics, my high intent mechanics. So why would I overly look at that? This is a place where we can feel things on the left. Now on the right, this is my high intent mechanics. So when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at a few things. One, I'm going to be looking at it through the lens of my own physical traits, my own physical capacity, right? Different biases that we have within the body, different ideas I understand about my own mobility that you should understand about your own, how you produce force, things like that. Secondly, we're going to be looking upstream to downstream because everything early in the throw is going to affect everything late in the throw, right? How we get our direction, how we get our linear momentum going, and a lot of other factors, right? Even our posture. So we want to ideally be looking at behind angle and side view angle, but I wanted to put these two together so you would see how they're different, right? We're looking at the side view. The first thing that I would look at is the center of my body, so my spine and my pelvis. From this position, we're not going to be able to see how the pelvis is necessarily tucked, but we can see how our center of mass starts moving down the mound. So as I approach peak leg lift here, so we'll slide it a little faster because this video is in slow motion. As I approach peak leg lift here, do you see how I've moved my center away from the rubber a little bit? Like here's the rubber way over here. Here's my center of mass, probably out here. Yet I still have connection, okay? I still have connection in the ground. Cool, so that's the first thing that we want to look at. And then as we move forward, we're going to continue to look at our proximal structures as much as possible. So we scroll through, we have our glove tap, our hand brake, that's going to yield our direction. If this was a behind angle, we would be able to see the way in which my shin angle works. Right? Basically, how am I loading? Am I loading more into my hip, more into my knee? Ideally, for me, it's going to be more into that hip. Now, we're going to see that I'm trying to maintain this stretch right here. We could call, now this is going to be different for everybody, right? But this stretch is going to be where I'm trying to produce what feels like tension. Now, I understand that term isn't used for a reason, but what feels like tension is a stretch of the fascial system. This is how we stretch and contract and reflex out of positions, right? And so since I'm building that, my focus here is, can I keep my pelvis closed, right? So basically facing third base, all right? And as I'm doing that, I'm building this potential energy. During this time, what's happening? I'm maintaining flexion, right? Rounded spine. And I'm trying to basically float these positions with my upper half, right? Especially my distal limbs. I want them to feel like they're floating. We're also holding internal rotation of this front hip, okay? That's going to be antithesis to the external rotation we're holding in the back hip. Now we continue moving down the mound. And you'll notice that my glove side does something pretty interesting. Now you can focus on the glove and look at it that way, or you can look at this shoulder, right? It's rolled forward, protracted, and internally rotated, okay? And so what that allows me to do is then move this shoulder from protraction into scapular retraction, which also allows my shoulder to get into horizontal abduction, which is elbow behind the shoulder, and then also start to flip up. Now I have kind of an elbow driven flip up, which just simply means that instead of this early kind of hand driven flip, I like to pull up with my elbow and then allow that to rebound into a flip versus somebody who does it maybe a little bit more passively. Okay, so knowing all that about myself, which is why it's so important to know yourself, what works best for you, we're going to start seeing that move. And so ideally, as I bounce out of internal rotation right here, I should also be, you can think of it as bouncing, but basically my pelvis should be pushed through. I don't like using the term pushed, but it should get driven through into rotation to where it starts to open up. All right, and let's see if that happens as we move into this. So you'll see we start to flip, and by the time we flipped, yep, look at that, pelvis is open, okay? Now, one thing I will notice the angle of the mound and the angle of my posture here. So I would consider this relatively stacked, head on top of spine on top of pelvis, although there is an argument that maybe I could be back a little bit further, right? And so that's something to take into account. Another thing to take into account that's really important in this position is, what is my elbow doing relative to my shoulder here? You'll notice that it's at least as high, if not higher. A lot of people have the tendency, mainly because of poor upward scapular rotation, to really have this elbow down in kind of this depressed position. And so I think it's important, if you want to feel a nice rebound out of the pec, to really get that arm up. Not just up in terms of flipped into layback or external rotation, but up in terms of actually above the lat, okay? Sweet. So as we move into this piece, we're going to go from flexion to now we're in extension, thoracic extension. If we were from behind angle, you'd be able to see it. Basically, the spine will look like this, and then it'll look like this, and then it'll look like this again as we go into ball release. Those are things that you want to be thinking about. Another thing you can be considering is, now, when I say thinking about, I obviously don't mean while you're actually doing the high intent throw. I mean in terms of analyzing your mechanics so that you can put yourself in the right constraints to fix the issues. Okay, so we're right here. Front leg is going to block. One thing I want to look for is that this knee doesn't slide too far out there, because it's a product of the back hip not absorbing force very well and rotating and pulling back, right? And that's going to be like the block. So one way we can look at that is with the knee. And knee angular velocities, basically the extension speeds of the knee, are extremely correlated to velocity. So it's an important factor to take into account. But one thing that people commonly misconstrue is believing that that should be a very linear, quad-driven move. Instead, it's just a movement of completion of rotation from the pelvis and then the block on the other side. So it's more of a posterior chain dominant move than people really realize. Another thing you're going to notice, and everybody's kind of different here, I'm a big hip extension guy, and I'm going to probably maintain connection with the ground past ball release. So that can be advantageous for some and not for others, but something to definitely take into account. When are we getting to peak layback? That's another thing to take into account. Ideally, you want it to be at or behind this ear, in my opinion, right? Some people maybe can thrive off it being a little up or a little back, but typically you want it in this healthy range. All right, you will see that once I get to peak layback, my elbow continues to push out in front of my shoulder a little bit. And, there's argument that that's not an efficient move. It is an efficient move, whatever it is. That is how I've learned to generate velocity the best. So that's kind of what I go with. You'll see that, and then we're going to start getting into ball release. Now, notice, this whole time, has my knee started to lock out? No, but it hasn't budged. It's been stuck in this position, stable, because of this front hip the entire time, and that's an important piece. And we continue into release. So at release here, one thing you'll notice, I'm a relatively lower-ish slot, probably average 3/4, whatever it is, allowing me to get some extension. Ball's well past the foot, but we're trying to make sure that our arm is spiraling out in line with our shoulders. Here you can even see that I'm probably losing a little bit because we do have some disconnection there. Not a complete extension of the elbow, but we're in that close range. So I would still consider it like a green to yellow range elbow extension. Sometimes you'll see guys, this is their shoulder line, and it's better to look at this from behind. And their forearm's way up here, right? At release. And that can be obviously a problem for a multitude of reasons. That's just not how energy effectively transfers up the chain. As we go into our decel, obviously nothing really matters after ball release, but it can give us some good signals of what's happening. And for injury prevention, I guess somewhat it could matter. We're going to continue to decelerate the arm, slap the back hip, and then we're going to recoil. And you'll see that move right there. And I think that's a move that you generally see in guys that are decelerating properly, is as this back hip goes through, and obviously mine's in heavy internal rotation, not everybody's is, you'll start to see this arm kind of snap back, and you'll start to see, because of these fascial lines that run from the hip flexor basically up to the shoulder girdle, and then on the back side from the glute up to the shoulder girdle as well, you start to see the contraction that just happened, and then the stretch back as kind of this recoil pattern. That's an efficient move. It's a healthy move, and it should not be coached out of you, because obviously there are some times where people might think we should be landing in kind of a fielding position. Obviously, that's going to be disadvantageous in almost all cases. So sweet, that's kind of how I'm looking at mechanics. And then obviously I'm going to then assess, right? Like, okay, this was my mechanics, and now how do I fix the necessary things I need to fix? And most of the time, that's not going to be by thinking about them. It's going to be by thinking about what positions I need to put myself in so that I don't have to think about them. And that's how you make drill selections. So that's a little bit more complex, and that's why a coach can be really helpful. But understanding that it's not that I need to think my way into these positions, but I do need to think right now while I'm sitting at this computer and say, okay, what are some good drill selections that will allow me to feel these positions, right? And without having to think about it while I'm throwing max effort in this frame, right? Maybe I think about it over here on the left, right? Maybe in this, I'm thinking about it. As you know, though, I'm not looking at the video, because if I was, I'd realize I'm not actually doing it, but maybe I want to feel it, right? One thing I was feeling this year that I think really helped is starting to feel this move where the glove feels like I'm really getting it out here into extension. And now everybody's going to be different here, but allowing that stretch to take place, right? The stretch that's basically from here to here, right? The distance that we stretch there, instead of necessarily the hip to shoulder separation stretch that's a little bit more transverse east to west. So everybody's different, everybody moves differently. That's something that I was feeling, and that was something if I remember correctly, I was probably actively trying to feel in this touch and feel. So looking at the video, you might not be able to see it, but in my head, I know I was feeling it, and then it comes out a little bit in the actual game. So sweet, I hope this helped, and if you have any questions, send me a DM.